And local bodega owners here in East Harlem say they're afraid they won't be able to compete.
I feel it's going to be bad for us.
When the government-owned grocery store opens, how do you think that'll impact sales here at your business?
The business is going to be slow because if they got 30%, they're not going to come in here.
At least 20% of our buyers are definitely going to start buying over there.
You're going to lose a lot of customers, you know. I have a lot of things here. They're going to buy cheap from over there.
It's going to be very difficult to keeping open the store.
So let's check in on the current state of Mamdani's government-ran grocery stores, because I kid you not, in the most ironic turn, he is now being sued by a bunch of immigrant grocery store owners. That is right. The group literally calls itself the Multicultural Business Coalition, to give you an idea of this. So if anyone remembers when Zohran gave his acceptance speech and he was shouting out, what was it, the Guatemalan bodega owners and the Sudanese taxi drivers and whatever that was, well, basically these people are now suing him. And the reason they're trying to block the government-ran grocery stores from going into effect is because they claim it's going to hurt their business. It's going to unfairly take competition and resources away from their grocery stores because they claim that the socialist grocery store is going to go and steal all their business. Now, if I were to be completely honest, I don't think that's going to be the case. We've explained before why this government-ran grocery store thing is just going to fail. It's going to result in rationing and scarcity and empty shelves. So if I was one of the, I don't know, Pakistani bodega owner, whatever person he is getting votes from, I wouldn't really be too concerned, honestly. I think the government-ran grocery store thing's going to be a disaster, but still, regardless, it is kind of objectively funny to watch, and we'll explain this whole current lawsuit here today. But what's even crazier is that in response to the lawsuit, we have people within Mamdani's circle basically saying, well, we have a solution to that. If you're a small business owner who's worried about the government system taking over your business, then we could just make all of the grocery stores socialist, government-ran, government-subsidized grocery stores. I kid you not, they literally came out and said this, right? Because if anyone remembers, on the campaign trail, he tried to downplay the whole socialist grocery store thing. He said, look, guys, we're not taking away private grocery stores. We're just saying we're going to have one government-ran grocery thing in each borough, and it'll help people with affordability. But no, we're not going to become Venezuela. It's not going to become this big thing. And then immediately we now have people around Mamdani suggesting, oh, well, we could just nationalize all the grocery stores then if it's such a problem. You know, pretty hilarious how that all works. Big surprise, right? They get into office, they immediately backstab their coalition of largely foreign-born voters and then suggest, yeah, the entire time our plan was to nationalize and have the government seize everything. It wasn't just about one borough or something like that. So I doubt it will actually go that far, but it is a model of, yes, what these people actually do when they get into office. You know, how the supposedly sensible, nice-sounding, moderate campaign promises end up turning into something rather radical and crazy. Nonetheless, let's talk about it, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. I don't know, let's try to hit 600K by the midterm election. How about that? Let's set a goal there. But anyways, so take a listen to these details. New York City grocery store owners are preparing to sue Zohran Mamdani over his plan to open city-run supermarkets across the city. The Multicultural Business Coalition, representing 50 different business groups, says the taxpayer-funded stores could crush immigrant-owned bodegas and small grocers by competing with them at lower prices. Again, our stance is that I don't think this is actually going to be a real concern because, again, these grocery stores are going to be extremely overcrowded. They're going to have empty shelves. The ideas, I can see where they're coming from, but I wouldn't be too worried. In fact, maybe later in the video, we'll explain once again, because I feel like it's an important little monologue as to why government-ran price-controlled grocery stores fail and why you get empty shelves in Venezuela and the Soviet Union and how that works. Because, you know, it's important not just to say that socialism or communism are wrong, but explain why. So we'll do that. But still, okay, this is their concern. I'm just pointing out this is what's going on, right? So Mamdani's plans call for 5 city-owned markets selling essential items at discounts of up to 30%, with the project estimated to cost about $70 million. And you can surely assume it's going to cost more than that. It's going to work terribly, even if they throw more money at it, because we just generally know what happens when these types of things are set up. And we've seen that story before, so that's not much of a surprise. But yeah, so here are those full details. Quote, apparently, what's going on here is, first of all, you see this group of immigrant-owned grocers who have threatened to sue New York City are now basically moving ahead with that plan. And the coalition's president here said, quote, although we have not heard from you since May 2026, which is to say, these people came to City Hall, they voiced their concerns. The Mamdani administration basically just ignored them, which is, pretty fitting, right? The immigrant bodega owners are the people we're going to ignore the moment we get into office. But that's what always happens. So not much of a surprise there. What'd you expect? But anyways, we are open to resolving this matter amicably with more sensible solutions to feed working class people, et cetera, et cetera. The coalition is looking to file in either state or federal court or both, but basically, quote, we are at the 11th hour. We have multiple versions of the lawsuits that have been prepared. The federal case will be based on antitrust and predatory pricing. The state cause of action will be torturous interference and possibly discriminatory practices by the administration. He further added, and this is what's especially hilarious, you're kind of almost being sued by diversity, right? He added that the group, which represents Asian, African, Caribbean, Hispanic, Middle Eastern, and Jewish-owned businesses in New York, has been repeatedly rebuffed by City Hall since May, when it first requested meetings with the socialist mayor. He won't even talk to the immigrant bodega owners, right? It's just like the communist revolutionary that, he becomes dictator of his little island and then buys a Rolex immediately and smokes cigars while his people are starving. That's the same behavior. They always do this, right? But anyways, the city recently issued a request for proposals and is seeking operators for the 5 owned city supermarkets. The city's RFP, quote, demonstrates a lack of understanding of the supermarket industry, well, gee, you don't say, and raises questions about the efficacy of the plan, adding that city-owned grocers could, quote, paralyze their operations, reduce their slim profit margins, or even force some out of business entirely. And to make a long story short, again, Mamdani has basically ignored them, which is why they're now seeking legal action. Here's where it gets funnier, though. So in reaction to the lawsuit, basically those around Mamdani have hinted this idea that, well, to the private grocery stores, guys, if it's such a problem, then what we could do, if you're worried about this issue that, you're going to be outcompeted unfairly because these like price controlled subsidized grocery stores are basically having a price advantage over you that you can't compete with because they're receiving subsidies and price controls from the government and you're not, then guess what? We could just expand the project. So we could also have the government basically subsidize and take over your grocery store as well. So that way it's all fair. And so that way we have equity or whatever across all the grocery stores. And so basically, right, that's what they're saying. They're saying, let's have the government take all of them over, and then there's no issue of the imbalance between a public and a private grocery store. It's hilarious. Take a listen.
Breaking news after socialist Mamdani announces government taxpayer-funded groceries, sparking backlash by private ones saying it's going to slaughter them. Now one of his lead officials is providing a solution with more taxpayer funds.
We can all cooperate and work together in a meaningful way.
Do you mind, what is the, I've heard that term from EDC officials, that these are meant to be complementary. What does that mean? What does that complementary mean in terms of policy, operations, and things like that?
Yeah, I think we're, as an agency looking at a number of different complementary, policies and programs, grants, incentives that can come alongside these grocery stores to support other, local independent businesses that are in the neighborhoods. We're going to continue to listen and we're going to continue to engage, and I'll be, alongside the operator as our partner. And like I said, making sure that we are complementary to the other businesses that are here in the neighborhood.
So other locations, other grocery stores can get grants from the city under this?
Something on the table. We're exploring a lot of different options and opportunities. I think there's a whole host of levers that the EDC is able to work within.
Yeah, so I'm not making that up. This is apparently the solution the Mamdani administration is presenting to the problem. Don't worry, we can make them all government-funded socialist grocery stores. Which, first of all, not to be that guy, but I am going to be that guy. How are you going to pay for this? Where are you going to get the money for that, right? Because already the $70 million grocery store project is massively expensive. Do keep in mind, this is a city already dealing with a huge budget crisis, as we talked about before. Sure, the state of New York bailed you out over the last budget, but they don't even have the money to keep on doing this forever. And so if you're somehow going to expand the socialist grocery store thing from one to all of them, it doesn't really equate that will actually manage to be paid for, but, you know, who cares about math and all that? By the way, I'm sure that subsidizing all the grocery stores is totally going to lower prices for New Yorkers, because that's 100% definitely what government subsidies tend to do. Oh, wait, they don't? Because if anyone remembers, by the way, taking economics in school or something, right? What do government subsidies do on that supply and demand curve? They artificially stimulate demand, right? Which makes the competitive price actually higher, right? That's, for example, why health insurance is massively more expensive now under Obamacare. Once the Obamacare policy started giving huge subsidies to the insurance companies, funny how that didn't actually lower the price of your healthcare, economics lesson, whatever. But, you know, apparently there you have it. So we were, again, first of all, told that it was just going to be 5 government-owned grocery stores against each of the throughout each of the boroughs. Now suddenly they're saying, no, well, we can expand it, guys. Don't worry. And, you know, honestly, I wouldn't be too worried, because first of all, I think it's going to run out of money. But still, it tells you a lot about how these people try to solve problems. Apparently, you know, just throw money that you don't have at all of it. And by the way, I promised I'd do it, so let's do it again. And this is sort of my thesis as to why I think the concerns of these immigrant grocery stores are actually exaggerated, although I could understand if they open, for example, the socialist grocery store right next to yours and you're that unlucky business, yeah, probably your business is going to be hurt. But let's actually define, at least from my perspective, this is my take on it, right? Why the government grocery store is going to fail to begin with, okay? Because this is something I feel like we need to do more as conservatives, actually explain what's wrong with these ideas. Because a lot of times right-wing media will just be like, look, they want to make it like Venezuela. Okay, but why do we have empty shelves, or did we have empty shelves, I should say, in Venezuela? Why is it that in communist countries you get bread lines and all this stuff? Okay, well, this is actually the problem with the idea of a government-ran price-controlled grocery store. And why, by the way, they don't just fail in communist or socialist countries in the third world, the global south, or the historic old communist bloc from the Cold War. They've also failed right here in the United States. This was, for example, tried in Kansas City, and it was the same issue, right? They just got rocked by empty shelves, mass theft, all this different stuff, and ultimately that store had to close. Well, here is actually the reason. Is because and why a public grocery store fails when a private one doesn't. Okay, so if you're a private grocery store, it's all about incentives. When you're a private grocery store, and let's say you have a product that sells out. It's super popular. Everyone wants to buy it. Okay. So if you're a business owner and seeing, oh, we have empty shelves today because everyone bought everything, you would look at that and say, okay, business is booming, so let's go buy more. Let's restock our inventory. Let's put this stuff back on our shelves because, by the way, this is selling. Every time we sell, we make profit. The profit incentive, we make money. We want to do more of that. And so you're going to keep on restocking your inventory so long as it continues to be profitable. That's, of course, the incentive of a private grocery store. If you're a public grocery store, especially operating at a price control like this one right here, well, what's going to happen on the first day? The first day, it's going to be the best thing ever because everybody wants cheap groceries. Everyone wants a discount. And so kind of like Black Friday, it's fully expected, especially given this is New York. They're going to do one grocery store per borough. Do you understand how dense the population of New York is? Let me just take a wild guess and say on opening day, it's going to be chaos. Everyone's going to want to buy everything in the store because why wouldn't they? It's cheap, et cetera, et cetera. So, but here's the thing. If you're now the manager of that public grocery store at the end of the day, and you look at your empty shelves, well, the logical thing if you were a private business would be, hey, I profit from selling stuff. Let me restock. Let me go buy more and keep on making money. But here's the thing. You are not profiting as the public grocery store because, again, you are selling at a government-instituted price control, right? According to Mamdani, it has to be 30% cheaper than the retail price across other grocery stores. So inherently, you're kind of losing money, yes, every time you sell something, okay? And you're relying on basically the government subsidy to come in and pay for that price control and pay for your grocery store to exist. Well, here's the thing, right? what you're inevitably going to have to end up doing, and this, by the way, is why in communist and socialist countries you end up with the infamous bread lines, the rationing and stuff like that, right? Is because, yes, if you have a bunch of people swarming to go buy something, but you can't replace it, you basically can only replace it to the extent to which the government gives you a finite amount of money, right? The subsidy to stock your shelves, or in, say, a more hardcore communist economy like the Soviet Union or something, they directly supply you with, hey, this is X amount of rations of bread or whatever it is we have this week. That amount is finite. And so again, you don't actually profit from selling something. If anything, you lose money every time someone buys something. So by nature, if you're a public grocery store, you are going to have to start rationing your items, right? So this is why, for example, you get empty shelves in Venezuela that don't get restocked, because basically either they're waiting for more government subsidy, which again is finite, it's scarce. The government only has so much money, like New York City, by the way, which is already broke. They only have so much money to give you. You can't operate at a natural kind of free market incentive to buy more. And so you're just stuck with an empty shelf, right? Waiting for the next time the government will come and give you more subsidies or more rations, by the way, once you restock the shelf, like you saw every Wednesday or whatever day of the week it was in the Soviet Union. You know, everyone knew that's the day where the government restocks the bread supply. So you get this super long line. Everyone is trying to wait for it. Everyone's fighting. Everyone's rushing for it. It goes empty again. And then we don't have bread again. And, you know, it's not a nice way to live. That's why you get starvation. That's why population struggle and all that stuff, right? But hopefully that makes sense as to, yeah, that's why government-run grocery stores don't actually work, right? Because when you don't have the profit incentive and the amount of subsidy or rations you're getting from the government inherently by nature is going to be scarce, you have to practice, instead of practicing for-profit business models, instead of practicing free market economics, you have to practice what we could probably call scarcity economics, right? So then you start rationing your supply, and that's why you get scarcity, yes, and rationing in socialist economies, because by nature, the way it's set up, that's how it has to work. That's why you never see prosperity or abundance coming out of these countries, because the whole system is not designed to be that very way, okay? So my whole case, for example, as to why maybe these immigrant grocery stores don't have too much to worry about is because, yeah, I would predict that's exactly what's going to happen in New York City, you know? People are going to swarm in. They're going to want to buy everything, get empty shelves. Probably initially early on, the government will keep on paying for it to make it have this semblance of being this utopian, wonderful thing. But eventually they're going to have to just keep subsidizing it more and more, as they admitted to themselves, by the way. Oh, maybe we have to subsidize other grocery stores as well, by the way. And eventually what happens? The government does not have the money to keep subsidizing and losing on this grocery store thing. So inherently, then you have to start rationing it. Then you have to start practicing scarcity. And, you know, in the end, that is ultimately what happens. So, you know, that's kind of, if we were to break down maybe the economic failures of Marxism and all those kind of leftist ideas, I mean, that could be an explanation of it, is that, well, theoretically, on a utopian earth with infinite resources and infinite money and there's no such thing as scarcity in the world, then yeah, in theory, you could have this like government ran grocery store. You could be giving free stuff to everyone else, right? Free stuff out and all that. But because there is scarcity in the world, because resources are finite and this distribution system inherently doesn't work in terms of distributing those resources, and that's how you get the bread lines, right? By the way, who's to say that a bunch of quote unquote Democrat voters aren't going to just go steal from those places as well? So, which by the way also happened in Kansas City. They also had a theft problem just because, yeah, cheap stuff. This is kind of one of the sucky consequences of living in modern America, but you know, like cheap stuff and discounts, I would call it the Carnival Cruise theory, right? Cheap stuff and discounts kind of incentivizes the worst, most low trust, most anti-social populations to flock to those things. And so exactly why a cheap cruise, a cheap airline like Spirit, you get the worst kind of human behavior taking place on it. I'd also predict that's going to happen in these grocery stores as well. So don't be surprised if theft also just becomes a major problem. But even assuming nobody steals, this thing is going to fail. And well, I guess the city could try to respond by trying to keep on giving it bailouts, keep making more socialist grocery stores. But as they always say, the end time of socialism is what, you know, the government runs out of other people's money and they're not going to be able to afford for this. They're going to be able to afford this, not going to be able to keep subsidizing it. And then, yeah, you're going to end up with the rationing, the bread lines. And ultimately, at the end of the day, people are going to realize, oh, I guess I got to just stick to my old private grocery store, right? because the line outside the public one is too long. There's nothing you can buy at the public one unless you like wait every Wednesday morning like it's the Soviet Union. Then, you know, you could perfectly do that. But if you want the convenience of just being able to go buy groceries in a normal time and a normal experience, not going to be able to happen. So there you go. There you go. Anyways, that said, let me know your thoughts on this, guys, in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.